Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to another installment of the NTC podcast. Aaron Washington, Colin Maher is joining me, salary cap / CBA specialist for no trade clause. We are fresh back from Summer League. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming. But what do you know? We have some breaking news that just came out not too long ago about a certain Celtic gotten paid. Depending how you look at it, music to your ears or a little bit of a stressful scenario. I don't know how you feel about this, seeing as you're a Boston guy. But either way, it should be a fun conversation. Looking forward to it, Colin. Glad you're back, man.
Yeah, glad to jump on the pod as normal. It was great to do the studio shows in Vegas. So hopefully everyone can check those one out. But happy to talk the Supermax deal. It's I think it's a pretty polarizing contract, whether you're talking in the media or the fans. So happy to dive in with you.
Yeah, man. I mean, just to dive right into things, I think the first impression that everybody had was this sticker shock. It's like anything else in today's world. Prices are going crazy. You want a house, you got to spend the bag. You want a car, you got to spend the bag. You want to retain a guy that's not even a superstar in our league. I think most people would agree. You got to spend the bag. You got to give him what he's looking for, which in this scenario is a Supermax contract that will take effect in the 24-25 season. So we're going to jump right into that right now, Colin. So just to kind of lay things out for everybody, looking at the terms of this deal, exactly what happened. It's a full 5-year contract, Supermax extension taking place, set to start next year. Could be worth up to $303 million. Now, of course, that is not a final amount. That's going to be based on how much the cap rises each year, which I'm sure you'll get into here a little bit more in a minute. But I mean, this was something that was talked about in Ruben for a while. He was obviously eligible going into this offseason. There were rumors swirling. Are they going to give it to him? Are they not going to give it to him? Is he going to be traded for Damian Lillard? I mean, there were so many different scenarios being tossed around by the media outlets. But at the end of the day, the Celtics saw the need to bring him back. He's in the fold until I think 2028, 29. Just crazy money, crazy contract. But, I mean, we've seen it already this offseason. We've seen guys get the bag. We've seen Bruce Brown get the bag, Jeremy Grant, other people that most would say is an overpay. But in this scenario, it makes all those other contracts look like chump change, just in comparison. If you do the math, Jeremy Grant's contract, which I've been on record saying is a negative value contract, many other people will say the same thing. Jaylen Brown's going to almost double that. I mean, if you think about the first year of his deal. So, I mean, it's just a lot to kind of take in right now. But fact of the matter is, Jaylen Brown is locked up all the way through his prime years, into his early 30s. The Celtics have a lot of money on their books going forward. It does not impact him this season. So all the contracts have already been solidified for this season. 2023-24 doesn't change. Porzingis is on board. He's on board for $36 million, and then his contract extension comes in. So, I mean, Boston spent the bag. They want to keep this core together, and they want to ride out this window as long as they can. So I see why they did it. But what are your initial impressions about this deal, Colin, and how do you feel about this, from the Celtics perspective? Right.
Well, just like what you said, I mean, as far as from a front office perspective, you have to look at it as what else are they going to do? You certainly can't let them walk, right? And so So let's just dive into what the Supermax actually means here for a second. The Supermax is a nickname for the designated veteran player extension, the contract, which allows teams to pay over the 30% typical max for a player who's this tenured into the league, right? And what happens is you technically are allowed to, you can pay him whatever you want, but you technically can pay him over 30% up to 35%. So they could have negotiated anywhere between 31% to 35% if they wanted to, and even put in incentives if they wanted to. That typically doesn't happen. I'm pretty sure the only time that has happened is the Rudy Gobert contract.
Right.
So when you're talking about negotiating between, a couple percentage points of the cap with your second best player who you need happy, I'm not certain that it's going to be worth it, right? So if you don't think that he's necessarily worth the 35% of your cap, then again, you can't let him walk, then the only other option is to seek trades for him and see what you can get in return. And essentially, there's no way that you're going to get back the value that you have for him right now, especially for a team like we were just talking about before we got on here that is competing for a title every year, and they're in the Eastern Conference Finals, if not the finals, every year, right? So you have to keep him on the team unless you're getting a legitimate player back. So at that point, it essentially becomes that you have to pay him the full supermax at that point. Yes, it's a lot of money, and they're gonna have it's gonna hurt in a couple of years, which we'll talk about. And it seems like it took a little while for them to get this done because they were negotiating over the trade kicker. Looks like that's what delayed all of this. But it seems like something that had to get done. Breaking down the deal just a little bit more, like you said, it's a 5-year deal worth a projected 304 million. Again, we don't know how much it's going to be set at. We'll know that going into next year. Once the salary cap is set for next year, his first year salary will be set. That's the 35%. It's not 35% every single year.
Right.
It's set then, and
That
then what
first
happens? Right, and then what happens from there is it's 8% raises. From there, it's 8% of that first year salary gets added on each year. So we're projecting about 50. Again, go on notradeclause.com, check out the Celtics cap sheet. We're projected a $52.3 million first year salary, assuming that it's a 10% salary cap increase like it was last year. And then he's going to get 4.1, close to $4.2 million raises every year after that. So that's the overall cap breakdown. The part that got negotiated in that it seems like it was the delay was the trade kicker or the trade bonus, which takes place if he gets traded. It's not a no trade clause. He wasn't able to get one of those for two reasons. One, it was an extension, and you can't add one in an extension. And two, even if you could, he didn't have the number of years of service to get one. You need 8 years of service and 4 years of service with the team. He only had 7 years of service at the time. So the only thing that he could negotiate in was this trade bonus. Our good friend Neil, another member of No Trade Clause, he sourced the information. It looks like he got the lesser of 7% of unearned base compensation over the term of the contract, or $7 million. So if he's traded, it looks like it's going to be $7 million for the majority of this contract is going to be the trade kicker. What's interesting, though, is that, again, you still can only pay Jaylen Brown up to the maximum 35% every single year.
So it can't take him over that 35 at any point.
Right, exactly. So as his overall salary dips down below 35% year to year, as we think it will, what happens is the trade kicker will start coming into play. But for example, he can't be traded for a year now. That's one of the rules at all. That's a rule just being signed to a Supermax deal. And then after that, what happens is he's getting paid 35% already. So if he got traded next year, it doesn't matter. And then after that, the trade kicker comes into play, but only minuscule, and it'll increase little bits over time.
Exactly. And Colin, I feel like this is a good time to bring up our new tab on notradeclause.com, which is our cap sheets percentage. So as you mentioned before, for next year, he's at 35%, which is what that Supermax indicates. From there, it drops slightly. So 25-26 the following season, he's only worth about 34.3% of the cap. From there, it's 33, 32, 31. So that difference between where he's at and the maximum of 35, that's where that trade kicker starts to come in, and it's worth more because his percentage of the cap drops every season.
Right.
So, if you guys are looking for some context on this, you want to see exactly like how much of these contracts are taking up of a team's total salary cap. All you have to do is go to our page, which as of this recording, it will most likely be up. So you guys can go up there and look right next to cap sheets. There's a cap sheets percentage, and it's duplicated from our normal cap sheets. But instead of giving you a number, which can be difficult to kind of understand in the grand scheme of things, we give you a percentage. So it starts to bring things into focus a little bit more as to why they're getting this amount and not this amount. And what's also interesting about this, Colin, is he's at 35%. So you see the salary of what he's getting paid next year. And it's going to be for Jason Tatum. His is coming into play. He's going to come into play the following season, and he's going to be at 35%. But his contract will be more than Jaylen Brown's because of that increased total salary cap number.
Right.
So that's also something that the Celtics have to keep in mind, is that you're going to have two players on your roster now that are going to take up 35% of the cap, which is pretty insane just thinking about that. Not to mention Porzingis, which thankfully they got him extended at a lower number than what he's getting paid right now, which is 26% of the cap. But for next season, it's 19 and it goes to 18 those 2 seasons. So that's a benefit for them. He's not getting paid any kind of max. But, I mean, they're still going to be up against that second apron for the foreseeable future. And we're going to have to monitor their finances to see how this all plays out because, I mean, they're going to be really hamstrung going forward in terms of being able to add talent to this team just because they're dealing with all the restrictions that come with the second apron. And we've talked about this at length on other podcasts. So if you guys are looking for more insight on that, you can definitely check those out. But, I mean, it's just going to be difficult for Boston to navigate. So a lot of things to kind of think about here. But just to kind of bring the point home, I mean, Brown is at 35%. His contract will be a little bit more valuable as time goes on and takes up less of the cap, but it's never going to be worth any less than 31%, even in the final year. So no matter how you slice it, it's going to limit what they can do, and it's going to be really tough to kind of take out in that contract as the years go on.
Yeah, and just to touch on the percentages that we're projecting out. So for this year, it's clear how much the salary cap is and all those percentages. Each future year, we're just assuming that the cap is going to increase 10%, which is under the new CBA, the most that it's going to be able to increase. And, it increased 10% last year with the new TV deal coming into play. It's going to, we really assume it's just going to keep increasing 10% year to year. So that's where we think we're going to be at. Those numbers could change even with the salaries that are locked in. So they're all projected figures moving forward. But yeah, even with the maximum salary cap increases at 10%, you're right. Jaylen Brown doesn't go below 30% of taking up the cap space. And again, that gets tough when you have to pay another Supermax. You're going to have to pay another Supermax contract that kicks in 2 years. And, if you're okay, I'd love to jump into, where the Celtics have to go from here, because with the new CBA, that's going to be the next issue is the apron limitations, and more importantly for Wick and the other owners with the Celtics is going to be the increased tax rates that are going to kick in.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot that the Celtics are going to have to deal with. The tax rates, of course, getting more punitive as time goes on. They're going to have to deal with the potential of losing that pick 7 years out, because what's pretty incredible about the Celtics situation right now is, aside from their financial situation, is their draft capital situation. I think they're still doing pretty well as far as their picks go. But, I mean, looking forward, I mean, those picks tend to be pretty valuable for a team in contention when you're talking about 7 years out. So that starts to get – if that gets pushed to the bottom of the first round at 30 and those other penalties coming through, I mean, it's just going to be a lot for them to deal with. So, I mean, it's just – there's a lot going on there. But what's honestly also pretty crazy about this deal is, I mean, it's just players just one-upping each other every single year. You had Jokic last year at 276. So he was the previous high, I believe, on his Supermax. Then comes Brown at 300. Then it's going to be Tatum. Then it's going to be whoever. So honestly, how much you're paid is just basically when you are extension eligible, whatever season works for you. So whoever comes in next, he's going to be the next highest. So every single year, and like you mentioned before, the new TV deal is going to up the ante a little bit as well. So whoever's next on the docket, they're going to make history. And it just kind of goes from there as a snowball effect. So, I mean, another part of this to think about is when you're thinking about future implications is, Brown's impact as far as on the court. Last season he was at 26 points a game, supremely valuable to this team. Also 49% shooting from the field. So, I mean, he was probably his best season yet. But there were still limitations, and you watched the playoffs. I'm sure you saw, going into that game 7 against Miami there, some of his limitations, the 8 turnovers. the loose handle at times, the inconsistent shot. So the question I was asked on Twitter is, regardless of whether or not he's worth it today, is there a potential for him to grow into the type of player that is worthy of this kind of deal? Because in my mind, to really be worth 100% of this, you need to be at least top 10, if not even better, when it comes to your place in the league, when you're talking about the most expensive contract in the league. And I don't see him in that class right now. I'm doubtful if he ever gets to that class, talking about a top 7 or 8 player. But in any case, whether or not he's worth it, I guess it's worth it for Boston because of, like we mentioned before, just them being a contender. So just wanted to mention that as well, as far as what he means to the team on the court.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. What you just said there is the most important part. If he's a free agent, not that another team could give him 35%, but if he was a free agent, it's probably not worth the Charlotte paying him 35%, right? But it probably is worth it for the Celtics again because they're in contention. They're going to be competing for a title year after year, as is what we expect. And again, you can't lose him for nothing. So you just have to overpay, and that's just the cost of doing business. And Brad Stevens has to get savvy working around the fringes to, whatever their goal is as far as whether they need the ownership has to dip under the tax to avoid the repeater, which we can get into, or whether they're going to even try to avoid the second apron. That those are things that that group, they're going to have to look forward and see really how close they are and whether it's worth diving into those because it's getting riskier and riskier now, or if it's time to unload one of those bigger contracts to dip below the second apron, first apron, or that tax threshold.
Yeah, I mean, their numbers are pretty staggering. I mean, I'm looking out to next season. I mean, they're already, for this season, you're looking at 182 for team salary. And then going forward for next season, we're talking about over 200 million for that roster. So, I mean, any way you slice it, there's a lot of money going to those top 4 or 5 players. Because in the midst of this, with Brown's situation, it's easy to forget that, okay, Porzingis is on a pretty big contract of his own. And then there's Malcolm Brogdon at over 20. And then you have Derek White at almost 20 million for looking forward to 24, 25. So even without Tatum's contract on the books, they're paying 5 players, around 20 million plus, just those 5. And then, of course, Jaylen Brown, the wildest of them all at 52. So, yeah, for Boston, they're definitely going to be in a position to where they have to make things happen on the margins. But if anybody's going to play that role and do it well, I think Brad Stevens has got to be near the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
He's already made some great moves, just going in and bringing in, Derek White a couple of seasons ago to fortify that rotation was an excellent trade. All these trades, it seemed like it was great value. I mean, they're sending out like second rounders and unwanted contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely took advantage of being able to get these guys in a good deal. Now, of course, they're having to pay the piper now, and they're coming up for extensions and everything. That's the problem. But I will say that I think this front office, they have a good track record of maximizing assets and making good deals. So I think between the draft, Jordan Walsh already looks like a solid player. Making those good minimum signings. I'm sure they'll find guys on the margins that want to win a title going forward. Got a great chance of making that happen. It's not going to be easy, but these guys have proven they can do it. So it's just about taking on that challenge and seeing what you can do from here.
Yeah, and going back to the contract situations, the key year here, and then you're going to have to look back, right? Is going to be the 25-26 year. That's when Tatum's Supermax is going to kick in. His projected salary is going to be $57.5 million. That goes along with Brown's 56, and then Porzingis is 30. So just those 3 guys alone are going to be 88% of the cap, and it's going to be 72% of the up to the tax threshold. And what's key here is that the very increased tax rates go up at that point. So, for example, and this goes for the repeater tax. So what happens is you have the standard tax rates. A couple of those are actually going to go down $1.50 to $1 the first couple brackets. But what happens is the repeaters, which are the ones where if you were in the tax in the previous 3 out of the 4 years, you are in this next entirely new level of tax rates. So, for example, they're about $13 million over the tax right now, right? So they'd be in this third bracket. That one's going to go up from that's going to go up from $3.50 for every dollar to $5.50 for every dollar that they're over.
Wow. So we're talking about $2 increase.
It goes up $2 increase, so it's $5.50 for every dollar. So
that's staggering.
And what's key here is that, of course, they'd have to be in the tax for the 25-26 year for that to happen, and they're already close just with those 3 contracts. Right. And then you have to look back at the other 4 prior years. Well, they're in the tax last year. They're probably going to be in the tax this year unless they move things around before the end of the regular season. And then it goes into this next year that you're talking about. So they're most likely going to be repeaters unless they dump a lot of salary at some point. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they end up doing to try to avoid this repeater tax. But maybe ownership is just willing to do it if they think that they're true title contenders every year and it's just worth it to them.
And another key about that season, Colin, that 25-26 that we're kind of looking at under a microscope. I mean, they have 3 really key rotation players hitting free agency at the same time. Yeah. So Brogdon, White, and Horford all at the same time are going to be free agents. So they're going to have to find a way to reload the roster, right. And they're not going to have – I mean, obviously they can re-sign those guys, but I mean the tax penalties at that point, if you re-sign those guys and give them what they're worth, is just going to be astronomical. So
yeah. And that's the thing I failed to mention. That's a perfect point. Is I brought up the 3 big contracts that bring them up to 88% of the cap. Well, they only have 2 other guys under contract: Rob Williams on a good contract, and Jordan Walsh if he's still there, on his rookie contract. And from that, you have to fill the entire team.
All those guys. So I mean, like you said, it's like $5.50 for every dollar.
Yeah,
when you're in the tax, so it's just like it's insane.
If you're hitting that tax bracket, so it'll be it's going to be really interesting to see what approach they take. If they're extremely close, if they're making the finals, are they just going to keep pushing and paying out those dollars and taking up those those roster building limitations that the first and second apron take hold of when you're doing this, or is it a no matter what we know that we're just going to have to dump salary at some point?
Colin, I think there's an easy solution for the Celtics in this year. All Tatum has to do is just accept that player option, and they can solve a lot of their problems. So.
Yeah, that $37 million instead of $57. Yeah, you just waive about $20 million.
Yeah, that's no big deal.
No
I mean,
problem.
It won't hurt him much.
Absolutely, I'm sure he'll have no problem doing that.
Yeah. Just take one for the team,
or just trade him. You have your highest paid player already, so he's the best player. So
right. Oh man, yeah. I mean, it's just all really just crazy to think about. Just kind of taking more of like a bird's eye view of everything, looking at the contracts this summer, and Brown is kind of brings it all together, kind of to top things off. Just how incredible it is and how difficult it is going to be to build a roster. And this is something we talked about on past podcast, but the fact that the NBA is trying to clamp down on teams like Boston, like Phoenix, to try to prevent them from doing this. And I think at some point it will work, but it's going to take a couple of years. I think the Celtics are going to ride through 23-24, ride through 24-25, 25-26. Okay, maybe we need to have some discussions about whether or not this is worth it. Same for Phoenix. I think they'll go through the first 2 years, and these changes, as you noted in your CBA change tracker and on other podcasts, they are gradually being implemented. So teams are not going to see this and right off the bat just say, oh, we're out, we're going to take our foot off the pedal. It's going to take a couple of years. And then on the other side, you have the teams that have been kind of trying to skirt the cap or the tax altogether. They're going to spend a little bit more. So I think the moral of the story is that the parity will be increasing. And Bobby Marks mentioned this on the podcast or the studio show in Vegas when you and Anil were on with him. It's going to create this kind of effect. And no, we won't see it this season to that effect, but I think eventually we will. Eventually the Warriors will cut ties and they'll trim things down. They've already started to do so with trading Poole. We've seen that. Over time, it will work. It's just going to take a little bit of just getting pinched for pennies and seeing your assets dwindle, and then we'll see teams reconsider. But even Boston, as big of a market as they are and as big of spenders as they are, will get hit. It's just going to take time. It's going to take Brown's $56 million and Tatum's contract for it to take effect, but it will happen. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. And it really all comes down to the value that ownership and management see in both everyone, media and fans talk about the tax. The tax is really just what the ownership has to pay, right? So it's the value that ownership finds in paying the tax, and then the value that the front office finds in foregoing, those roster building limitations as far as the frozen draft picks. Is it worth doing that to go over the second apron, to hold on to your guys, to make another run, right? Is it worth it? Because you can unfreeze those in 3 years. So, and then it won't drop to the end of the draft. So is it worth doing that? Or, is it a no questions asked? We need to get below the apron to avoid that. I think every team is going to be different. Of course, every team's different when it comes to the tax. I'm never go over the tax. So, but I think everyone's going to be different when it comes to these first and second apron limitations too, and how they value them. And then the other part of it too is going to be, as Bobby Marks talked about it too, the free agency is already so dried up, right? Everyone just signs their contract with their prior teams because they have better rights, and then they enter what they're all calling the trade portal. But now with the new CBA rules, there's going to be so many limitations for so many teams as far as what they can do trade wise and how much salary they can take in. So then the market's going to be so thin on that side of things too. So it is. So there's not going to be as much movement. So it'll be really, really interesting to see just how all that shakes out. It seems like it hasn't slowed teams down yet as far as paying guys. I just saw a tweet from Bobby Marks saying there was like $4.6 billion in contracts spent this year, or signed this year. So, it hasn't slowed anything down yet. I think teams are just like, let's sign them and then we'll figure it out later. And then I think they'll pay the piper and see that they might have to unload some of these assets and not get much in return just to dump the contracts, because the market's going to be so thin, because it's going to be so hard to find trade partners who are even able to trade with them.
The way I see it, every single team has a credit card. Their limit is pretty high. They're spending up to the limit. Okay, we spend money today. It's not going to hurt us today. It's not going to hurt us tomorrow. But eventually, credit card companies come back and they say, all right, we're going to need at least some of this back. You got to pay a minimum if you don't pay it off entirely. And if you don't, guess what happens? It just accumulates. There's interest. It just gets worse and worse until you're like, okay, something's got to change. So that's just the way I think about it. These teams are spending. They're spending. Right now, it makes sense because, they're making an investment in their short-term future, trying to win this championship. But things are going to change over time. So I'm just really fascinated to see what Boston ends up doing, what Phoenix ends up doing. It's pretty wild. You see all these details come out on the CBA, and you have two teams that just say, it's fine with us. We're just gonna take it to the next level. You thought we were spending a lot before. We're just gonna take it up a notch on you.
Well, yeah, Phoenix is the best because they said not only that, we're gonna go get another massive contract and just empty out our entire draft. All our draft capital. I mean, the Celtics were just keeping one guy, and the only way that they could do that is paying the Supermax for him. But I mean, Phoenix actively went out and got these guys and emptied their entire draft capital. But look,
Insane.
if you win a ring, it's worth it. That's all that
Yeah,
matters.
it's worth it. Yeah.
So
That's what you play for.
yep.
So, I mean, that's what Boston's going to be judged on. We can't judge them today. We can't even judge them next year. It's going to be how far can you go? Can you get over the hump? Can you get back to the finals?
Mm-hmm.
If Brown and Tatum somehow don't work out, if they can't get to the mountaintop this year, next year, I mean, do you see a scenario in which they try to move off of Brown? They try to kind of run this back and just kind of cut their losses? Like, how do you feel about how that might go if this doesn't really pan out the way they thought it would?
I would be shocked if they move off of Brown, because it's probably going to be even harder to, if they're going to move off of Brown, they had to do it before the Supermax, because then they could have traded him and another team could have extended him for the 30%. Mm-hmm. So now other teams are going to be stuck with this massive contract. And if they're willing to trade him, that means he's underperforming. The team's underperforming. He's going to be way undervalued so he's being way overpaid at that point. So they're not going to get anything back for him significant. I don't think they'll ever be able to trade him. If anything, they'll trade Porzingis at that point.
I can see that. I can see that.
Yeah.
But if I've learned one thing, Colin, over the past few years of just watching the NBA unfold, is that no contract is untradeable for the right price.
That is definitely true. And look, we're waiting on Damian Lillard right now, who hasn't even entered his Supermax.
Right.
with Portland. Hey. So who knows? Maybe Brown will want to trade before his Supermax kicks in. We never know.
Give us enough picks, enough young assets. Yeah. We'll trade it, and some team is going to be desperate enough to make a run that they might take it on.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, it was John Wall. It was Russell Westbrook. Can't move off of that contract. It just doesn't make any sense. And then what do you know? They end up getting traded multiple times. So you just never know.
That is very true. That is very true.
Yep. Colin, anything else about this contract, the Celtics, or anything else here before we kind of wrap it up?
I want your Lillard update. How you feeling about that before we sign off?
Oh, the Lillard update. I don't know what day we're in. I should have been keeping track. It seems like day 95 or something like that. It just feels like it's been dragging. My honest feelings about it, kind of anxious, to be honest. Just ready for something to get done. I've seen rumors about keeping Hero and trading everybody else, shipping Hero and all this stuff, getting another pick so they can trade, I think, the 4 first that Portland wants in this deal. Really torn, man. I just really hope that Miami can find a way to get this done and not be left with the empty living room and the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air little picture where he's just standing there. There's nothing left.
Yeah,
that's my main concern for them in these negotiations. So if they play their cards right, I think it will really work out in their benefit. And they're neck and neck here with Boston again. But I don't know, man. It's going to take some convincing. I think it's going to get drawn out for a while longer, and I think it's just going to take a while because there's a lot that Portland wants back, and it looks like they're going to have to bring at least a third team into it, which further complicates things. So it's definitely going to be a saga that drags on for a long time. I just hope it doesn't drag into the season to where we have games going on and things like that, and we're getting distracted by, is Dame getting traded today? Is he getting traded tomorrow? He didn't report to training camp, and kind of like that Dwight Howard / Anthony Davis stuff that was going on. I just feel like that's bad for the game. It's bad for the coverage of the game. It detracts from the experience itself. I'm just hoping it doesn't get there. It might, but we'll see.
I think it's a lot of posturing that they're both not trying to show their hand of what one's willing to give up, what the Blazers actually want, and it's probably going to end up being a 3 or 4 team deal, and it'll just get done.
I think it's got to
take a while. I mean, there's no rush now, really.
Mm-hmm.
They have a few weeks, so
they'll get it done. We're in the dog days, man. We're in the dog days of summer. We're all just sitting here roasting, just waiting for some kind of news to come out.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll see, man. Just don't get too comfortable, because I feel like as soon as you get comfortable, that's when it all just kind of goes crazy. So
no question.
We'll see. But I think that brings us to the end of another installment, everybody. We thank you for joining us. Hopefully, this gave you a little bit more insight into the specifics of this deal, what it means for Boston, what it means for their future, and how it impacts the NBA as a whole. But really enjoy this conversation, Colin. Thanks for jumping on
Thank you.
again. Your expertise is always appreciated. And, just hopefully this all turns out well for them, man. The pressure's on Boston, but let's see if they can go ahead and get it done.
Absolutely.
And everybody, like I said before, be sure to check out notradeClause.com for that cap sheet percentage tab. That should be live now by the time you're watching this. So if you want to see how much of the cap Brown is taking up, Porzingis, Tatum, all these guys, we have it for you, all 30 teams. Be sure to check that out, or resources available for you guys to view at your leisure. But guys, enjoy this off season. Have a great time, just sitting back and relaxing. The World Cup is around the corner, so I mean, there's always more basketball on the horizon. But until the next installment, we'll see you guys later. Have a good one, and hope to see you on the next one.